here for that. You're not here to have a tombstone made for you or recovered. I'm sorry. Kitty is scampering in the background. Both kitties. It is as if they are possessed on this wintry, rainy evening. So you're not here for a tombstone. Then, yes, I think I know why you've come. You've come to have your tarot read. Are you sure that's what you want? That's what everyone thinks they want. So, we can do that, but I can't promise you that you'll like the answers you get in the tarot cards. How did you know I read the tarot? I never tell this to anyone. Go ahead then. Go ahead. Pick 3 cards from the tarot. The top 3. The deck has been shuffled just for you. 1. The Wheel of Fortune. Go ahead, take the next one off the top of the deck. 2. The 3 of Cups. And go ahead. Hopefully you won't find anything bad in there. The Queen of Swords. Yes, I can read that for you. It's not maybe as bad as you might think. I personally think that the cards you have drawn are quite auspicious. The Wheel of Fortune means what's old is new again, what's up is down, etc. What does that mean for you, you ask? It means your day as a professional hot dog eater. Oh wait, I forget. What is it that you do again? Oh, that's right. And I've heard you're so good at it. I would believe it because you're a wonderful person, a very kind person. Anyway, it may mean something is new on the horizon for you. Or perhaps it is in reference to your personal life. Hard to tell. The fates are vague. The 3 of Cups is a reference to fortune and hospitality, so perhaps you will see a new fortune. The Queen of Swords references cleverness and bravery, both of which you have in spades, so perhaps the new fortune will be a result of your never-ending cleverness. So now, if you're satisfied with your tarot reading, I'm afraid you really must go. Kitty is quite possessed tonight. Do you hear her? She's playing with some poor creature. What do you mean you're not satisfied with your tarot reading? What else could I possibly tell you? Oh, I'm afraid you're mistaken. I don't know what you're talking about. I don't do anything like that. Your family is related to mine. I don't think so. How do you know about Hunter Cobblestone? You say you are part of my family. What is this you have brought me? I do know these people. I have a copy of this book too. This is my great aunt. Who else do you have here? This is my great uncle, Uncle Schmertz. And who else do you have here? Ah, my great-great-grandmother. And her sister. And who else do you have here? Ah, my great-great-great-granduncle. Yes, you have proved your point. You are part of the family. So you do know about Tilda Gobblestone? No? You're here to find out more? We're coming closer, and I will tell you everything. But first, I want to give you a first-hand account. So I must channel our great-great-great-grandmother, Tilda Gobblestone, and this is her story. Hello, this is Telehundra. So if you have come to listen to my adventures and misfortune, I will not keep you waiting. My life wasn't always bad. It started happy enough in a grand mansion located in a wild patch of Ireland in County Galway, known for vast tracts of emerald green land and dark, stormy seas. In my early years, I grew up surrounded by much love and laughter. Both came by way of my mother and her sisters, who, according to my father, were as wild as the land. Then one day, without any word to me, they were all banished from our estate, even my poor mother. Where they went, I would not know for some time, and why they were sent away would also remain a mystery. Several years after their departure, I would have my first great misfortune, and this is the story I wish to tell now. It is a tale of how I first became interested in solving crimes, for I was involved in a crime that principally surrounded myself. Later, I would go on to be a detective in my own right, and even later, I would become a psychic detective, and there I would take on both mortal and supernatural elements of pure evil. I was born Tilda Wynne McMurray, but from an early age, everyone called me Viola, for reasons that I still cannot explain. I have no musical talent whatsoever, so I could not have been named for the instrument, although this lack of talent never stopped me from playing the piano and singing as loudly as possible. What finally stopped the music altogether in our house was the departure of my mother. After she was sent away, my upbringing fell to my father, a man full of oddities, and a penchant to leave our estate as often as possible and travel abroad. I was left with my governess named Tilda, who had a sharp tongue and only one eye. What happened to the other one? I asked one day, staring at the patch she wore like a pirate. This led to severe raps on my knuckles with a hard wooden rod. I never asked again. Tilda was severe of face and character, and she would make me stand on a stool and conjugate every Latin verb under the sun until I was blue in the face. But when nobody else was around and the house stood empty, Tilda would tell me about demons. They crawl out from the bowels of the earth. Some are human, some are not. Have you ever seen one? I asked. I did. He was alabaster white and wore no clothes. He made the milk sour in every cow, and he walked the earth and devoured everyone in sight. Did he devour you? No, but you just said he devoured everything in his sight. He did not see me. How is that possible, really? If you saw him, how could he not see you? I asked. Let us try conjugating the verb to watch in Latin. This is how conversations with Tilda always went, but I was not one to give up easily. Where do you suppose he went? Who? The demon who devoured everything. Tilda thought long and hard about this as we sat in the library, surrounded by first editions of hundreds of books. I was lying on the Turkish carpet, the one my parents had brought back from Constantinople after their honeymoon. Tilda was sitting in a chair. Its blue upholstery exactly matched the paint on the walls. I watched her as her one eye roved the shelves. Tilda was remarkably well preserved for someone who had known my father and his brother when they were children. In fact, although she looked severe, she also looked much younger than my father. I wondered how she kept her youthful appearance. The demon went into the soul of a man, Tilda said softly, a black tundral dark night escaping her tight pun. Which man? I said, trying not to sound impertinent, although, to be truthful, it was as impertinent as the day was long. You see, at the ripe old age of 15, I was quite sure I knew everything about the world, and what I knew was this: there are no such things as demons. I would press Tilda until she confessed her foolishness. Imagine my surprise when Tilda did not confess any such thing, but instead said to me, "Your uncle. He went into the soul of your uncle." Even when my father was home, he was not home in the true sense of the word. His feelings towards me were not so much governed by sentimentality as they were by a sense of duty. I only saw him during meal times, and even then we seldom spoke of anything but the foggy Irish weather. My father was a gentleman, which meant, of course, that he had much leisure time. This time was spent either in his study with book and pipe in hand, or on long, solitary walks. He would quite often return from such a walk and look otherworldly, as if he did not recognize either his home or his kin. Absent-mindedly, he would deposit his cloak on the stand near the door and retire to his bedchambers with nary a word. In short, he had no interest in me, nor in my happiness. Indeed, many years later, I came to the conclusion that after he banished my mother and her 3 sisters from our home, he no longer took an interest in anything. Meanwhile, I was raised by Tilda and the ferocious Father Mackenzie, who preached fire and brimstone from his pulpit at the little stone church in the village. One Sunday, as I was gaily walking, Tilda says skipping, out of church after a long sermon about bad women and their place in hell, Father Mackenzie grabbed me hard by the arm and gave a little twist. "Did you listen to the sermon?" "I did," I replied. "Have you been to confession lately?" He knew very well that I had not. He was the only priest in town. "You should come more often. You especially need confession, given that your mother was a—" Here he broke off and glared at me with 2 beady black eyes like that of a crow. "A what?" I asked. Beside me, Tilda, in her matronly grey dress, cleared her throat several times before briefly locking eyes with the priest. It was as if a flash of something electric passed between them. Whatever it was, Father Mackenzie immediately discontinued his discourse on my mother and changed topic. "And of course there's your uncle," he said a moment later. "What about him?" I asked. "Mercy, child, hasn't anyone told you?" There was another stare down between Tilda and Father Mackenzie, and it lasted a good minute or so, with neither of them saying a word, and me trying in vain to wrest my arm from the priest's strong grip. "They say he murdered a man." "And what of it?" Tilda's voice broke in. "What of it? It has nothing to do with the child." Father Mackenzie returned her stare before giving me a hard shove in the direction of my governess. "It has everything to do with the child. She has bad blood, don't you see? Murder on her father's side of the family, and everyone knows her mother was a—" He never finished the words because Tilda pulled me out of the church so fast I couldn't hear a thing he said. I never found out what he thought my mother was, because that night my father passed away, and I left my home and the little village with the stone church behind me for good. I was told, as the carriage made its way from my father's estate to that of my uncle's in County Cork, of the suspicion that had fallen on the man. "It is a disgraceful matter," Tilda said, in the tone of one who did not want to have such a conversation. I stared out the window at the passing countryside, all tied together in long patches of spreading heather and green, wavy grasses. Briefly the sun poked through the clouds, and I remembered being 6 years old and being swung by my arms around and around by my mother, my feet not touching the ground. In my head I heard, "The skies are full of ravens, the night is full of wrong, the waters are full of fishes, and the days are full of song." It was the words my mother sang as she swung me. She was full of such verses. Some she had learned, some she had invented. Besides Besides being a chanteuse, my mother was quite simply the most beautiful woman in all of Ireland. My father always said so. Upon their marriage, he built a special walled garden for her, where she grew mostly herbs, but also roses, delphinium, and other showy cottage flowers that thrived on the rain. In the center of the garden, underneath a huge oak, there was a swing my father had fashioned for her. Occasionally I would spy them, hiding behind the pink plumes of the ever-spreading beauty bush, a monster of a thing 15 feet high and equally long. My father would push my mother on the swing, and she would laugh with happiness, just as I had done when she had swung me and sang to me. The skies are full of ravens, the night is full of wrong. The waters are full of fishes, and the days are full of song. You know, that song is so untrue, my mother had declared on that particular day, glaring up at me from the most ignoble of chairs, a stump belonging to a long dead rowan tree. She looked at me with smiling eyes. The best things happen at night. Power comes to our kind at night. Someday you will understand. The night is full of wrongs, but we were put on the earth to set them right. And by we, I always understood her to mean she and I were put on this earth to make things right. So now, as the carriage swung along the road, raising dust as the horse's hooves churned up the earth, I thought that whatever it was that was wrong with my uncle, perhaps I could remedy the problem. He was the one who cast a bad name on your family, not your mother. No matter how many say otherwise, Tilda said matter-of-factly, staring down at her bone-thin hands. It took a while for the rest of the story to come forth from her pale lips, but here is what I soon learned. My uncle was accused of murder, but there had never been enough evidence to bring him to trial. It was said that he owed much money, especially to one man, a Walter Cumber, who had been found dead in my uncle's house. Tilda explained that my father had told her about it when she first came to work at our estate, lest she hear it from the gossips in the village. There were letters sent about the matter to your father, she told me, although exactly what they said I do not know. Here Tilda stole a glance at her shoes, a curious gesture on her part, and which led me to believe she knew more to the story than she was saying. Tilda may be many things, but I knew that for her, telling even the smallest of half-truths would make her feel like a liar, and Tilda was no liar. I did not press her further about the matter, at least not at the time. After a day's journey to the south, with a stopover at an inn, and after crossing through thick woods of a type I had never known in Ireland, we reached my uncle's estate. I found my uncle, Reginald McMurray, a gay and extravagant sort. It was not hard to imagine that so flamboyant a man might be addicted to gaming. From the state of his house, which looked as if it could use with a good deal of renovation work, as plaster fell from ceilings, and stone stairs melted away from the wear and tear of time, it did seem that my uncle was in possession of a ruined fortune. Despite this, he was extravagantly turned out in fine clothes, wearing smoking jackets and deep scarlets, and riding boots that appeared brand new. I soon learned that careful attention to his dress was due to his vain, pompous, and overly self-assured nature. He can no longer afford the finer gambling establishments, Tilda whispered to me a fortnight after we arrived. That's right, you always see so many unsavory characters about the place. He brings them here to play cards. I thought this over as I slipped between the sheets of my shabby bed. The room I was allotted was a spacious affair, with splashy peacock print wallpaper that had aged poorly. At night, in the dark. Their circles on the tails of those peacocks appeared in the darkness like a million eyes, watching my every move. "I have noticed he is often in the company of Mr. Hugh Turlington," I replied to Tilda, who was going about my room with a candle and a wooden holder in one hand and picking up my clothes with the other. I did not know then, but I was about to suffer yet another misfortune. In accordance with God's wishes, it was not enough that I had lost my father and my home. I would soon lose again. You see, dear listener, my hours with Tilda were sorely limited, only I was too young and too naive to have any idea that she would soon be taken from me, just like my mother. In the village, they say Mr. Turlington is a man of loose morals and low habits. They say he has considerable wealth, yes, but that he spends it on many vices. They also say he frequently traveled with your uncle on the continent. With that rather ominous tidbit of news, Tilda bade me good night and left me alone to retire to her room in the servants' quarters. Over the next few days, my uncle and Mr. Turlington proceeded to shut themselves away in a private room. I did not mind. I was happy spending my days with my cousin Anne. In general, we went for long walks around Redrick, which was the name of my uncle's estate. Despite its state of dilapidation, it was an imposing house at the end of a long avenue of venerable ancient trees, and, for some reason, on every walk with Anne, I would imagine, with a shiver, that first ride up the avenue to Redrick, not knowing what to expect. I remember glancing around me at the road, which was overgrown with nettles and grass, and passing by what must have been at one time 2 fishing ponds, which were now nothing more than stagnant waters, green with moss and rank weeds. My first glimpse of the actual house had been immediately unfavorable. It stood at the summit of the avenue, made of a dark gray stone, and pressed in on all sides by trees which badly needed trimming. It was a rather long, rectangular affair that seemed to jut up from its place on the summit with solemnity and permanency, as if it had been here since antiquity. As our coach arrived closer, I found the whole place worn down and ruinous, almost to the point of looking deserted. Yet it was not, for here lived my uncle, his daughter, and his son. When Tilda saw Redrick for the first time, she did something most curious. She drew the sign of a pentagram on the floor of our carriage with the toe of her pointy boot. This was something I had seen her do on rare occasions. Had it been anyone else, she would have made the sign of the cross, but in front of me, it was always this symbol of superstition. On that night, when the moon had risen full and high, our carriage entered a courtyard via the castle's old stone gate. Here, too, were signs of despair. The courtyard was overgrown with numerous weeds, and the cobblestones were broken and rough. Somewhere in the night, some poor chained beast gave out a piteous wail of a bark and alerted 2 dirty, slovenly men who seemed to fit in quite well with the ruinous estate of Redrick. The men took charge of the horses, and we were ushered into a gloomy chamber, only to be received by no one. This situation was soon remedied when a pink-cheeked young girl dashed in the hall and kissed me on my cheek, declaring herself to be my cousin. "Dear, dear Telejandra, how happy we are that you have come. Oh, but not to worry. My father is about the place somewhere. Indeed, as I learned later, he was off playing cards with Mr. Turlington. And my brother, well, James is not often at home. He travels a lot, you know." My cousin Anne was so genuinely pleased with my arrival that she seemed to beam from head to toe, and I found myself immediately at ease with her, although Tilda glared at her steadily with her one good eye. "Come, you must be exhausted. I shall show you to your room," Anne announced with much frivolity. We then mounted the decaying steps to the room with the peacock wallpaper. The only good thing about the apartment is that it has 2 doors, one which opens onto the hallway and one which opens onto my cousin's room, so that she is never too far away. It was not long after I attended to my grooming that night that I first met my uncle, and the 3 of us sat down to dinner. Where my uncle's partner in gaming was that night, I do not know. My uncle strode into the room with much dignity, and initially appeared to me as a striking man. He was tall, and as already mentioned, dressed very elegantly, with a shirt replete with creamy tatted laces ruffles down the middle. Other than the shirt, he wore dark colors that matched his sober appearance, and, like my father, he said very little to me. The second night, however, our dinner conversation was more in depth. "So you have come to us, and you are most welcome. But tell me, my dear, what is your understanding of your father's will?" God's nightgown, who asked such a question? I was struck silent, which Tilda will tell you is no small affair. "Everything is left to me and my heirs," I said. "Yes," my uncle replied, and he tapped at the corner of his mouth with a napkin that was threadbare. "And if you should die without an heir?" I can't tell you of the immediate distress this caused me. A tingle of dread ran down my spine. It was not a question of polite society. Beside me, Anne cried, "Father, must we talk of such things?" It was Tilda who responded as she helped serve the main course. "If she dies without heir, everything goes to you, Mr. McMurray." Her words were clipped and curt, and directed at my uncle like the blades of a dagger. Tilda then proceeded to place a pile of lumpy brown mush that she swore had once been a quail onto my plate. I had no appetite, and spent the rest of the evening pushing the food around with my fork. As if the dinner discourse had not been distressing enough, that night I was woken by a most unnatural noise. It sounded like a quarrel of some type was taking shape in the apartments below. There was a parlor there, and from that room the voices rose louder and louder, until there was a strange sound, a loud, twanging noise of something metallic reverberating after striking something hard, a wall perhaps. In my drowsy state, I imagined my uncle had struck at the wall of the castle with something like a shovel. But why would he do such a thing? I was happy the next morning when I learned that my uncle had left with Mr. Turlington to parts unknown and would not be returning. I spent the day with Anne out in the woods playing hide-and-go-seek and other such games. After lunch, Anne retired upstairs, and Tilda took to working on a pile of sewing, while I was free to roam around my new home. It was in the library where I learned more about the suspicion of murder that had fallen on my uncle. To my dismay, the books in the library at Redrick looked as if they had not been touched by anyone in years. They were first editions of every worthwhile book on the planet, and they were covered in thick dust and cobwebs. I spotted a translated version of Ovid's Metamorphoses high upon the shelf, and I endeavored to retrieve it. I had spent one very long summer afternoon at my father's estate, Carrick lay by the sea, trying to translate the book to Tilda's satisfaction. As a result of my inability to grasp the classical languages, I never understood a word Ovid had written. So, finding the book in my native tongue, I was most curious. But to reach the book would require scaling the bookshelves. At home in County Galway, I would have had no qualms and scaled the bookshelf like a monument on Mount Snoot. I do not know where Mount Snoot is. My mother sang of it often, but Tilda declared the existence of such a place to be utter nonsense. Now, however, I thought a more ladylike approach to reaching Ovid might be best, so as not to scandalize any of the handful of servants at Redrick should they happen upon me. To this end, my eyes searched the room for something to stand on, and I saw, to my satisfaction, a large rectangular leather trunk that looked stalwart enough to hold my weight. Unfortunately, it was not stalwart enough, and I fell over backwards, overturning the satchel and pouring its contents onto the floor. I spent the next half an hour putting the correspondence back into the trunk, when I happened upon a letter written in a familiar handwriting. Despite myself, I hastened to pull the letter from the envelope and read its contents. My dear brother, I have heard of the inquest in your small town of Tilda. I can tell you of the dread I felt when I was summoned into the constable's office and told of the suspicions against you. They say that your gambling debts were called in by Mr. Walter Cumber, formerly from Galway. The constable informed me that Mr. Cumber was found dead in your apartment, and it appeared as if he had been struck more than once by sharp objects. The constable further insinuated that there had been an inquiry, and you were, in fact, the prime suspect for owing, as the man informed me, a large sum of money to Mr. Cumber. I must inform you of the stress that this cost me. I was struck dumb to think that our father left you in possession of good fortune, and that your wife's family in Cork left you in possession of a fine estate. To think that you have allowed both of these things to pass into disastrous states is beyond comprehension. The constable, Martin O'Brien, went on to inform me of the facts. I denote them below. A servant woman of yours had knocked on Mr. Cumber's bedchamber when he did not come down for breakfast. When he did not open the door, the servants forced it open and found Mr. Cumber lifeless upon his bed. It was noted by a coroner in Tilda that Mr. Cumber suffered 2 wounds. One on his temple, inflicted with some sharp instrument, and which had penetrated his brain, and another which had grazed his head, removing a piece of his scalp. The constable then related to me that a thorough investigation of the crime scene was investigated, and several peculiarities were noted as follows. The room was double-locked from the inside. Indeed, the key was still in the door. Nobody could have passed via the door. The window was tightly closed, and on the 2nd story, not a likely means of ingress. The chimney, too, was examined and ruled out, as it was built in the old-fashioned style and rose nearly 15 feet above the roof. Its inside was also of a girth that would not allow a man to pass. All these facts, coupled with the pair of razors found on the floor beside the bed, led many to believe that Mr. Cumber had died of a suicide. The constable of Tilda, as you know, dear brother, was not convinced. I am told he believed you had strong motives, sir, for dispatching your guest, as it was commonly known that you were deep in debt to the man. I have also heard of your side of the story, the one given at the inquest, where you claimed that the night of the man's death you beat him soundly at cards. So soundly that your entire debt was erased, and you even produced a note in his handwriting clearing you of all the money owed. It was at that point that the inquiry against you was dropped. However, I tell you that even though you are my brother, I am in possession of a letter from a man claiming to be Cumber's cousin, Mr. Collins, a letter which, according to the writer, proves your guilt. I had my manservant copy it out, and I have enclosed herein your humble brother, Thomas. After reading my father's missive, I can tell you, dear listener, I looked around in vain for Mr. Collins' letter. It had not been included in the envelope in which I found this letter. To be sure, I turned the envelope upside down, but found nothing. It must have been removed years ago. But I sifted through all the other correspondence that had fallen onto the floor. I found no letter from a Mr. Collins. I must admit, after an hour of searching through my uncle's correspondence, I felt quite like a spy. Father Mackenzie would have been happy to know that with every passing second, my guilt rose so that I became quite beside myself with anxiety. It is for that reason that when I heard the footsteps coming down the hall towards me, I almost jumped out of my skin. I only had a few seconds to return the rest of the letters to the trunk, or I would be caught in the act. My hands moved swiftly, so that the correspondence, all of it, was all returned, although not quite in the order in which it had originally been stowed. Then, shaking like a leaf, I turned in time to see who was approaching. A young man stood in the dark doorway. I couldn't make him out. "What on earth are you doing?" he asked. Once again, it was my dear cousin Anne who saved me. "Oh, James, you have found our dear Telehondra." "Indeed, I found her rifling through her father's affairs," said the young man. He was still hidden in shadow. I felt an urgent need to undo the wrong I had committed. No, not rifling through his affairs. I foolishly tried to reach a book, using this box as a footstool, and I overturned it. I was just putting everything back. I stood up as graceful as I could, and after wiping the dust from my skirt, I approached my cousin and curtsied. "Please, call me Viola. Everyone does. Nobody has ever called me Telehondra." He called me neither names, but glowered at me. Over the next few days, I came to find him exceedingly moody and disagreeable. He was self-assured of everything, and if it were dark outside, he would declare it to be light and expect the world to agree with him. He was also very forward, touching me awkwardly on the arm here, or an overly friendly peck on the cheek here. I recoiled at his very touch. For some reason, after his initial surliness, he felt it his duty to compliment me in an exceeding and disingenuous manner. Thankfully, I did not see him much, as he was involved in pursuits that called him away from Redrick at all hours of the day. The unsolicited compliments from this man went on for many a month. As fall closed in, the leaves fell in the woods, and the fog returned with vigorous abandon. I spent my nights at the dinner table listening to his descriptions of my beauty, which I swear, dear listener, did nothing but cause my stomach to churn. You are more beautiful, dear cousin, than the beauty bush you describe in your mother's garden. How would you know? You have never seen it. At this, his vanity was impugned. I have heard you describe it, and I say, no matter how beautiful it is, the most beautiful thing on this earth is you. My appetite would always disappear at these sort of remarks. Behind his back, Tilda made snide faces. She couldn't help herself. She thought him as disgusting as I did. Oh, he wasn't ugly, far from it. He was a handsome sort, with dark black hair, prominent cheekbones, and a not overly large nose. Altogether, he is quite good-looking, but it did not take much to know what he wanted. My inheritance. Indeed, I was proved right when a few days later, as I sat side by side with my cousin on a dilapidated divan, he entered and informed Anne that my uncle had returned from his adventures and was waiting in the high tower to talk with his daughter right away. "Be off with you then, March," James said in a tone which she could not disobey. It was 1871, and no woman would dare disobey any man. But Anne was overjoyed that her father had returned sans Mr. Turlington, and she hurried off as ordered. That is when James began to pace the room with a nervous expression on his face. Then he began his awkward attempt at courting. "You know, I suppose, it is quite out of the question that so fine a young woman as yourself could ever find herself in a position to love a fellow as me." Even though I had a suspicion this was coming, it still took me by surprise, and I stopped my embroidery mid-stitch. "My dear Viola, I have loved you from first I saw you." That is not true, I thought, and my eyes narrowed. He glowered at me that day he saw me in the library, stuffing his father's correspondence back in the trunk. I can tell you, all up and down County Cork, I am considered quite the catch, although I have never found a woman that struck me to the heart in any way. That is, until now. I was horrified. I flushed red with annoyance and disgust, and could not conceal my dislike. What kind of man struts around saying, "All the county considers me a catch"? I considered him abhorrent. Then, all of a sudden, he flung himself down next to me and had the audacity to put an arm around me. "Please, sir, I am but 15 years old," I said, and rose quickly to my feet to be free of his grasp. Something flashed in his eyes, a look of pure malice at being denied. He tried to hide it and attempted a smile. "Of course, you are a tender age. We shall wait until you are 16 and then be married." "We shall do no such thing. We shall never marry," I shouted. My embroidery be damned, I flung it to the floor. James stood up with an unnerving calm, like a man about to carry out a great sin and resigned to it. He looked, as they say, positively murderous. That's when I turned and ran, heading straight for my apartments. Behind me he came tripping along. I heard his footsteps here, a door slamming behind him there. I ran as if my very life depended on it, and reaching my room, I closed it and locked both doors. I briefly glanced around my shabby lodgings and wondered, was I safe in my room with my doors locked? I thought about that for a long time. Mr. Cumber had died in a room in this very house with his own doors locked. Had it been this one? Was there another way in? I set about to searching the room, but there was nothing to be found. No trap doors, no hidden passages, such as one might find in such an old house. Later, my cousin came to me, and seeing my distress, she was sweet enough not to ask about anything that had transpired between me and her brother James, a man I now firmly loathed. Dear Viola, let us go to the woods and play hide and go seek. I would have done anything to get away, so I consented. Although now that the sun was setting earlier and earlier, I wasn't sure if it was smart to separate in the woods. Once again, I was right, for when it was my turn to go in search of Anne, she was nowhere to be found. I should have stopped to seek my bearings, but I did not. Instead, I plunged deeper into the woods in search of her. It was then that I saw the bat. It was not a tiny thing. It was enormous, with 2 fangs clearly visible, an exotic animal if ever I had seen one, and draped from the bough of an alder tree. I thought it the most interesting creature I'd ever seen. How in the world did you get here? I asked it with a smile on my face. I found it beautiful in all its strangeness. Simply staring at such a creature as I'd only seen in encyclopedias on the natural world filled my heart with great pleasure. Have you escaped from some zoo somewhere? An exhibition perhaps in Cork? In response, it fluttered its wings as it hung upside down, and then turned 2 red eyes on me. I felt an instant connection, as if it could see into my very soul. You have come to me, I think. It is no coincidence that we have met in these woods. I was speaking nonsense, yet it felt right. It felt like I could communicate with this creature. It was just then that I heard a snap of a twig behind me. I turned quickly for fear it was James. What would I do if he sought me out here in the woods for vengeance? Indeed, it was a man. He passed not 10 feet from me, and I recognized him from the few times I had seen him in my uncle's house. It was Mr. Turlington. I recognized his blonde hair, fancy mustache, and the military uniform of bright red he always wore, having taken part of some campaign or another on behalf of Ireland. Apparently, he did not notice me standing amongst the alder trees, so I called to him, saying, Mr. Turlington, I do not wish to startle you. Come see this fine specimen of Chiroptera vampiris I have found in this tree. I fancy it is from India, and wonder how it will survive the cold Irish winter. Mr. Turlington never glanced in my direction. He walked straight forward into the forest with smooth steps, as if he were gliding. It was an eerie sight, and I returned to the house immediately. Dinner that night was a solemn affair. James refused to speak. My uncle filled the silence with talks of his visit to Paris and Prague and points in between, and Anne hung on every word her father said, happy to have him home. I saw Mr. Turlington out in the woods, I announced, somewhere between the main course and the pudding. You what? My uncle asked, and briefly he turned pale, as if the vampire bat from the forest had sucked all the blood from his face. You're mistaken. Mr. Turlington stayed behind on the continent. That was the end of the conversation, and I did not bring it up again. Now, we will end it here, because I see that the story I'm telling you about our shared relative Telehundred has put you to sleep. So, when you are ready for the second part of this story, you can leave me a message in the comments, and I will come back, my dear relative, and tell you exactly what happened to Telehundra on another night. Good night.